I've been doing this series in the last couple of days where I'm looking at the Steam machine in terms of what it could cost. So say between $500 to $1,000, more on the, now with the RAM prices skyrocketing even further, more on the $1,000 side of things. And I've been looking at possible options that you can do to get a PC that will be similar to the Steam machine in terms of performance, but at various price points. Now, so far we have done a couple of stores that we've looked at to buy new parts from, but I thought it would be interesting today to look at Jawa, which is of course a second-hand PC shop where you buy PCs directly from people that have built them and they get shipped to you. Now, Jawa does have some protection, so it is relatively safe to shop there, and overall it has quite a good name. So I thought it would be interesting to do this. Now, today I'm not going to be building my own system from parts that I've pre-selected. I'm looking at a couple of systems that I pre-selected, and I just want to see between the 500 to 1,000 range, what can you get second-hand on sites like these that are sort of like pre-built PCs that you can just grab and they're ready to go, and you don't have to be someone that knows anything about building PCs. You can just get a PC. So that's what this video is, and I'm taking a look at Jawa today. Now, Jawa is of course in the US, but this whole series has been US based so far. And the first one here comes in at quite cheap. Now, this is going to be an older PC, of course, but this is sort of the entry point. Now, I didn't line these up in any pricing structure. I just lined them up randomly. So these are all going to be random. Just to quickly run over the specs of the Steam machine, it is of course a relatively modern, not super strong, but modern component device, which has a 6-core AM5 Zen 4 CPU, comparable to maybe the 9600 or something like that. So we keep using the 7600X because I think that's going to be comparable. It has an 8 GB graphics card, which is going to be current gen, so it does have relatively good ray tracing and upscaling support. And then it has, I believe it has 16 gigs of RAM. It might have 32 gigs of RAM, I don't recall exactly. And it has a 512 or a 1 terabyte NVMe. It of course has a custom chassis and power supply, which is small factor. And lastly, it also has a relatively good Wi-Fi chip built into it for Wi-Fi 6E. Now, with that said, I'm taking a look at some comparable deals that you can get for between $500 to $1,000. So let's get into it. Getting back to this one, excuse me, the first one here is a cheap one, coming in at $540. And this, of course, isn't the newest system anymore. It's got a 1666 gig in. It's got a i5-10400, which is a relatively good gaming chip even now. It's got 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, a 1.25 terabyte drive, so it probably has a 250 gig drive and a 1 terabyte drive. And apart from that, it has this white chassis. It doesn't say the power supply over here. Let's see some more specs here. So it does have one SSD and one HDD. So if you do play games from the HDD, it's going to be a bit slow, but at this price point, it makes sense. It has a 450 watt antec power supply, Sigotep, I assume that should say tank, PC case, a white one, and it does have a Cooler Master AIO. So this isn't exactly going to compare to a Steam machine in terms of performance, but price-wise, this is good. You could get a screen, a keyboard, and a mouse, and a remote control for under $1,000 for some decent parts. But this is very last gen in terms of both the motherboard, CPU, RAM, GPU, all of it really. And so be aware that what you're buying isn't going to get the most performance in new games, and probably isn't going to be gaming for the next 5 years. At some point, the 1660 isn't going to be enough to play games going forward. I mean, we've seen that already with games like Doom that require RTX. Next up here, we've got another 551. So this one is also $550. It's called the Budget Baddie. It's got a Ryzen 3600 in, so that's a 6-core chip. It's last generation, but still decent for gaming. It's got an RX 588 gigabyte. Very much last generation, but can still play games at about 60 FPS at HD. It's got 16 gigs of RAM, and it's got a 750 gig NVMe. It comes with a stock CPU cooler and a relatively cool looking chassis, a Corsair chassis. This is the 4000D, so it's quite a nice chassis. It does have a Bluetooth dongle and a Wi-Fi dongle, and apart from that, much like the other one, this one is going to be comparable in terms of gaming performance to the one we just saw. But this price point is going to be a bit too low to compare to the Steam machine. So if you do buy something like this, you're not really in that same ballpark, but you are saving a lot of money. Moving on to a more expensive system. Now, this isn't that much more expensive. I mean, this is like $250 more expensive, but you're moving on to, yes, a last gen graphics card, but still a very current graphics card in terms of performance, and it does offer ray tracing support. A relatively weak but more current CPU that is good for gaming. It's a 5600X, and that's going to be almost comparable to the Steam Machine's CPU. It does only have 16 gigs of RAM, but it also has a 1TB M.2 drive. It seems to have a decent motherboard, because I see the ROG logo over there. It has a decent looking RAID Max case and water cooling AIO, and overall this is a very nice looking little PC. Now, this is comparable to the Steam machine in terms of performance. I think this is going to perform better. The 3070 is only an 8GB card, but it is a good one, and it is gonna perform better than the Steam machine, which I think will be more comparable to a 5050. So this is a good thing to look at, because this is $800, and so there's going to be a little bit of budget left when talking about the Steam machine. Now, of course, the Steam machine is current part, so you are moving to faster speeds on the CPU and RAM. But I think, gaming performance, I think this actually would do better. But you are limited in that you are previous gen and you can't go to the newest gen because it's AM4 as compared to AM5. Moving on to the next one. This one is called, this is quite a custom one. It's called the Meow Purple Cat Ninja. This one is $600. It's an interesting looking one. I'm not really one for gimmicky PCs, but I mean, it is smaller form factor. It's interesting looking at least, and it does have a little screen here, which is kind of cool. It's got a Ryzen 5500 CPU, so that's relatively good 6-core performance. It's got an RX 6600 GPU, so that's relatively good gaming performance for HD. And it's got a 1TB NVMe, 16 gigs of RAM, a 600 watt PSU. It doesn't say which one, but I assume it's an okay one, because the rest of these parts do look okay. I'm not going to spend too long on this one, but this one is $600, where these first two were near $600, but this one is just so much better, because you're getting a last gen but a lot better CPU in the Ryzen 5500, and it is a 6-core CPU, and you're getting an RX 6600, which even now can play most games at high graphics at HD. So this is a much better choice than the first two ones, and this is an example of something that it's not going to directly compete with the Steam machine, but you'll save a couple of $100, and it's not going to be far behind. Moving on to a more expensive system. So this is going to be probably just over what the Steam machine costs. And this is a RX 9060 XT. So that's, very fresh, very recent. And then a Ryzen 7 7700X. So this is a RTX capable computer. It's got premium components. It's got a very good looking chassis. It's got a relatively good AIO. It's got a relatively nice graphics card, and the performance for this one is going to blow the Steam machine out of the water. It just is what it is, but it does cost a bit more. Now, this does also have 32 gigs of RAM. It's got a 2TB NVMe, and it's a Gen 4 NVMe. It's got a 16 gig graphics card, which is a 9060 XT, which even at 4K is going to play games at 60 FPS. At HD, it's going to play them at high refresh rate. 650 watt power supply. It looks like a good power supply, because it is 80 plus gold, and it's not modular, but I mean, it doesn't really matter, because this this isn't going to be used for the most high power draw components, and it does have a nice little basement for the power supply. So the point is that this PC looks good. I think it will perform quite well. It's got a Cooler Master chassis, I see. And, you know, this is going to cost you $300-400 more than the Steam machine, maybe only $200 more. But the performance on this is just going to be so much better. Now, I know you'll have to spend an extra, let's say $100 on a remote controller and a keyboard and mouse, because you'll have to be able to use this. Well, although, you know, you can just borrow a keyboard and mouse from someone until you get your Steam OS installed, because then you can just use the controller. But to be fair, it's good to have a backup controller and keyboard and mouse. But I mean, you can get those for like $20 if you buy cheap ones. And so this just proves that the Steam machine doesn't necessarily make sense. I know that people like to buy something out of the box and it's new and it's this cool new thing, but something like this just makes way more sense, even if it is a little bit more expensive. Although you have to consider this is secondhand, but it is just going to perform a lot better. Moving on to the next one here. So this one is right in between at just under $700. This is an ITX PC, so in terms of form factor, in terms of size, it's going to be more comparable to the Steam machine, which I think is cool to look at, because it is interesting to make a one-to-one comparison. And I think this is going to be slightly cheaper than a Steam machine. So let's see what you get. You get in the ITX form factor, you get a RX 6600M, so it's just the mobile version of the 6600. You get a Ryzen 5500, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 2 terabyte SSD. So in terms of performance, it's not quite going to match the Steam machine. It's going to be a little bit worse because these components are a little bit older and a little bit worse. But if you're okay with gaming at HD, you're going to still be able to play everything quite well. We've already covered the 6600, so I'm not going to get into it too much. This is the mobile version, so it's slightly worse. But, you know, for just a light gaming PC that you put next to your TV, and this one does have Wi-Fi built in, this is perfect. I think it's maybe slightly overpriced for what you get. If it were, maybe you could get something like this on sale for $500, I would do it. But this is going to be more than enough. If you don't want to go with the Steam machine, this is a good comparison. The Steam machine is going to beat this, but this is still an interesting comparison. The next one here is actually $700, and you know, this one is interesting because it's the RX 7600 graphics card, which is, you know, it's a generation newer than the 6600. It's relatively more powerful, but it's still not a modern ray tracing card. It's got a Ryzen 3600X, so that's a few generations old, but for gaming it's still quite good. This does say that it has 16 gigs of DDR5, but that's impossible if it's got a 3600X, because that's AM4 and DDR5 is AM5. So that is something to be wary of when you browse sites like these, is not everyone's going to be honest, or maybe they just make mistakes. This only has a 500 gig M.2 drive. It's got a 650 watt gold power supply, and it does have 3 ARGB fans, and it actually has 5 because it's also on the CPU cooler there. So this is quite a nice looking PC if you like showy PCs. If this were in my office, it would be fine, but next to the TV, I don't want something that distracts so much. So this isn't the best comparison for a Steam machine. I think something like this is a lot better because it has some lights, but it's a lot more restricted. It looks more like a console. So in my honest opinion, this isn't a great purchase, because, you know, it's older components. The graphics card is decent. It's going to be comparable to a Steam machine, but it's not going to be quite as good as a 5050. And it has a very small power supply, a very small NVMe drive, you know, and yeah, I just don't think this one makes sense financially as a comparison to the Steam machine, because you can get something new for this money that will perform better. So to be honest, so far there hasn't been that many options that do actually make sense. Moving on to the next one. This one is called the Black Heart. This has a Ryzen 5 9600X, so that's a comparable CPU to what the Steam machine will have. It's got a RTX 5060, so that's going to be quite good. 16 gigs of DDR5 and a 1.25 terabyte NVMe. So this one does look relatively premium, but something that bothers me is yesterday we saw a brand new pre-built for, I believe it was cheaper than this, which had almost these exact components. And that was from Best Buy, which isn't even the best shop. So, in some cases, it just doesn't make sense to go secondhand. If you can get a good deal, it does. But something like this, I mean, you could purchase these components new and pay less than this. And, in that case, it just doesn't make sense to me to buy something like this. I mean, I know that not everyone's going to want to build a computer, and this one does have some premium components like the AIO, and the case looks nice, and it's got some cabling, aftermarket cabling and stuff like that. But I would rather just buy the pre-built that is cheaper than this. It's brand new and it's just plug and play, rather than something like this that someone's configured from second-hand parts. So I don't know. I mean, as a second-hand PC, I do see here that it does say brand new in box. So if that's the case, this is a lot more worth it. But I think this is still $200 more than the Best Buy one. So in that case, a boutique PC like this makes a bit more sense, because you do get the personal touches, and these are good quality fans and AIO and all of that. So if you're willing to pay an extra $100 for that kind of stuff, okay, that makes a lot more sense. But if this was, secondhand, it wouldn't make sense. But as a brand new PC, it's not the worst price. Performance wise, it's going to beat a Steam machine, but I do think this is going to be more expensive than a Steam machine. Moving on to one that is the same price, but a little bit better in some components, a little bit worse in others. This one unfortunately is used, but it says like new. Now, I'm not even going to look at it, because I can already tell you that if it is used for this price, it doesn't make sense to buy this instead of a Steam machine, because the whole premise of used is saving money, right? You don't want to buy something used if it's going to be the same price as the new thing at only slightly better performance. Now, this does have a 5060, but it has a worse CPU. It has more RAM, but admittedly for gaming, that's not going to matter too much if you're talking about the kind of games that the Steam machine is going to be good at. I mean, it does matter a little bit, but it's not going to blow it out of the water. So this is like 25, at most 25% better than a Steam machine, but it's going to be more expensive and it's going to be secondhand. So in my opinion, it doesn't make sense. I'm not telling you not to buy this, but if this were $800, I'd say, okay, it makes sense. I just don't think it makes sense at this price point. With that said, these are quite premium components, and it's it is a good looking computer, so I'm not saying you shouldn't buy this. I'm just saying I think there are better options out there. Second last one here, this is an interesting one. So this one's sort of like an elongated computer with a little doggy, which makes a lot more sense next to a TV. This one is $670. It's got an i5 10500, a Radeon 5700, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 512 gig NVMe. So my first thought with this one is it's a little bit overpriced. It's $670, but these are, very much previous gen components. This graphics card is even more previous gen, and while it's still relatively powerful, at HD it still runs most things at full. It just doesn't make sense to buy something this old at this point. Why am I getting so many messages? So, I wouldn't really look at this. I just think that, for $700, there are better things you can buy new than something like this used. And this says it's 4 years old, but these components are well older than 4 years. I mean, most of these components are virgin on 6-7 years. So I'm just going to move on from that. Okay, the last one here is this one is called the Christmas Blast. It's an interesting looking one. It's all white build, it seems, which is, kind of looks cool. I'm not sure how that's going to look next to a TV, but it does look cool. It's got a 9600X, it's got a 5060, and it's got a 4 terabyte drive. I'm not sure if that's an NVMe, 32 gigs of RAM. So yeah, it's a decent gaming computer. It is $925. So this has the 9600X. Okay, so that's top of the line. Well, not top of the line, but newest of the line for 6-core chips. consumer chips anyway. It's got a relatively decent motherboard that includes Wi-Fi, which would be Wi-Fi 6E. It does have a 4 terabyte NVMe. It's got an 850 watt gold rated power supply. I'm not sure which one, but that seems good. It does seem like an PVR one, so that's okay. 32 gigs of RAM, going to be DDR5, and it has a little video here for you to see what the performance is going to be like. So this might be the first one that makes sense. I think maybe there was one other one, but at under $1,000, you're actually getting quite a lot of value here. So let's say the Steam Machine turns out to be between $900 and $1,000. This is going to be better than a Steam Machine. So let's say the CPU is going to be very similar, but the Steam Machine one is going to be throttled in terms of power delivery, because that's not going to have a dedicated power supply. It's going to use a power brick. So this is definitely going to be faster in terms of processing power and computing. It has an RTX 5060, which is an 8 gig card. Let's see if this is the 8 gig variant. It doesn't actually say. Yeah, 8 gig variant of the 5060. But that's comparable to the Steam Machine. I mean, it has a 5050 8 gig adjacent GPU. This has a 4 terabyte NVMe, so that's quite nice, because that's 4 times the storage of the Steam Machine, which might be faster in terms of storage. It might have newer storage, but that is a lot of storage. That's going to be more than enough storage for anyone that is looking at this from a wanting to play games perspective. And it does have 32 gigs of RAM. So I think this last one here is the winner of the video. This is the only one that I think really makes sense to purchase. Now, of course, you must be a fan of white builds, and this is going to be quite a contrast next to a TV if you want to compare it to the Steam Machine. But I think it does look nice. It has a very unique charm to it, and it seems well built as well. So between this one and the 3071, this one is $200 cheaper, but this last one is just so much newer, and the 5060 and 3070 are going to be quite comparable in terms of performance. So I would probably still go with this, because this one isn't even $1,000, it's $925. So it's closer to $900. So I think this is the only one that really makes sense. And it does say that it's brand new as well. Even if it were used, this would make sense. So I think this is the winner. And it shows that if you know what to look for, and if you're willing to look around, there are components, there are computers that are comparable to the Steam Machine in terms of pricing, in terms of performance. This is going to beat the Steam Machine quite handsomely. Let's say 20-25% more performance in terms of gaming, and I think it's going to be cheaper. I think you can add a nice controller at $75, and then it's going to be the same price as the Steam Machine, in my opinion. No one knows yet, but yeah, this just proves that looking around is worth it. So with that said, it really depends on what the Steam Machine is going to cost at the end of the day. If it is $900, it might be worth it to just buy that, especially with the RAM, just doing whatever it wants in the market right now. But at the end of the day, having a look around is still very much worth it. So for the next one, I'm gonna do another second-hand one. Maybe I'll do Java and actually build a computer from parts and compare that to this video. But this was definitely an interesting video to make and interesting to look at. Did you enjoy it? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.